Zdravo, Momsy! Paul Curran here. I hope you and all the listeners are well. Some Croatian for you there, of course. Hello, chaps. I've just returned from a week or so in Croatia, spent largely on the Dalmatian coast of the Adriatic, and it's quite spectacular it was too. Well worth a visit, and I would like to have stayed longer, but unfortunately we soon had to split. Ba-boom. Now, in the period of time that has elapsed since the last Poetry Corner, several friends and family members have celebrated birthdays, which I would just like to acknowledge now. My sister Hannah celebrated her birthday last week. Happy birthday, Han, which was followed by my friends Elijah and Alan, and since then also by Tom, who has celebrated his birthday. Happy birthday all. And in the interim, my good friends Andy and Naz have welcomed their first baby, a boy called Blaze. Quite a list of names there. Here's another. I wonder if by the time I reach the end you have guessed which name comes next. Ben, William, John, Thomas, Nahum, Nicholas, Lawrence, Collie, William, Thomas, Henry, Robert, William, Alfred, Robert, John, Cecil, John, Ted, Andrew, Carol, and, of course, Simon. On the 10th of May 2019, it was announced that Simon Robert Armitage, CBE-FRSL, an English poet, playwright and novelist, would be the next Poet Laureate. But more of that later on. First of all, borrowing heavily from the Daily Telegraph obituaries column of the 30th of April 2019, this regards Les Murray, a well-known and well thought of Australian poet, poetry compiler and poetry critic. Les Murray, October the 17th, 1938 to April the 24th, 2019, has died aged 80. He was an Australian poet whose work put him among the most admired writers in the English language. From the late 70s, Murray had been recognised as a poet of international stature, yet he was wry about what he called in one poem the International Poetry Festival's thing, making digs at sitting through hour on stylish hour of it. Murray received many honorary degrees. He became an officer of the Order of Australia in 1989 and has been listed as one of Australia's 100 national treasures. Murray's work frequently defended and celebrated Australia's rural poor. It was an outlook that was informed by early tragedies such as the death of his mother and the decline of his father. Murray had a punning technique and a learned tone with which he came to question the whole purpose of poetry. In a later poem, he wrote pointedly, "Australians are like most who won't read this poem." His work was outspoken, and he became a controversial figure, at times sneered at by the critics he would come to see as liberal, metropolitan elitists. While he was sympathetic to the rights of Aborigines, he felt that the culture of white farmers deserved the same respect and told the Irish poet Dennis O'Driscoll in an interview, "Bias against rural folk does have an unspoken racial component, as well as the redneck stereotypes. Class is always at bottom racial." His first volume of poetry, The Ilex Tree, was a collaboration with his university friend Geoffrey Lehman. It appeared in 1965, and although his poetry in that book was more formal than his later pieces, there was already a leaning towards the spiritual metaphor and a reverence for work that he has continued to remind readers of Robert Frost. The dream of wearing shorts forever puts shorts in their deep cultural history and finds in them a metaphor for freedom. Shower inventively apostrophises what was clearly his favourite part of the bathroom, and Vindaloo in Merthyr Tydfil is self-explanatory. He wrote of the unforgettable curry, "Fair play, it was frightful." Critics could quickly pigeonhole him as a religious and rural poet, yet he could write energetically about any subject, and sometimes this poetry seemed unstoppable. His verse novel of 1998 is about 10,000 lines long. Murray concluded that he had a mild form of autism when his son was born with the condition. If he was right, then it's tempting to see his fascination with objects and his compulsion to examine them from all angles as an aspect of this. He thought of himself as awkward with other people, although many found him engaging, funny, and self-deprecating. Murray suffered from bouts of depression throughout his life until a liver complaint in 1996 led to a 3-week-long coma, and, on waking, I realised, in a foggy way, the black dog's dead. The dark shadows over his growing up helped to explain what he found so attractive about the Catholic faith. It was the spirit of forgiveness, he said, and he identified this as something that his family history had lacked. It is likely that his shyness was a result of having been an only child in an isolated community, and the teasing that he experienced at high school left him with a lifelong horror of the mob and of fashionable conformity in all its forms. His poems would speak for the aberrant, the original, the wounded. Murray won a scholarship to Sydney University in 1957, where he continued to devour the books that he found in the library. But after 4 years, he left without a degree. However, he distinguished himself at languages, particularly German, and in 1963 began work as a translator for the Australian National University in Canberra. It was in Sydney that he had met Valerie Morelli, however, who was Hungarian and a Catholic. They were married in 1962, and 2 years later Murray converted from the dour Freekirk Presbyterianism of his childhood to Catholicism. After that, all his books were dedicated to the glory of God. Valerie became a teacher, and when Murray devoted himself to writing poetry full-time, they took turns to support each other and their 3 sons and 2 daughters. The social upheavals of 1968 and the rise of postmodern poetry did a lot to put Murray on the conservative side of the debate about the role of poets in the world. This was increasingly clear from his books, whose titles alone tell the story. Poems Against Economics appeared in 1972, and Subhuman Redneck Poems in 1996. The latter won the T.S. Eliot Prize. Perhaps his best-loved book, showing Murray at his most intimate and thoughtful, is The People's Otherworld of 1983. The title refers to an optimistic view of justice. Even while his work was becoming increasingly anti-establishment and anti-urban, Murray was nevertheless a civil servant for a brief time, and was even asked to redraft Australia's Pledge of Allegiance. He was keen that it not be called an oath, since Christ spoke against swearing oaths, and also keen that the wording reflected Australia's promise of reflection in return. This he thought to be a revolution in a paragraph. Later, the Prime Minister, John Howard, sought his advice about the preamble to the Australian Constitution. A controversy arose when Howard wanted to include the word mateship as a quintessential Australian value. Murray was against this because he did not consider it a real word, and the Senate voted against the move. Murray retired from public employment in 1971, and in 1975 was able to buy some of the farm in Bunya on which he'd grown up. There he devoted himself to poetry. His work as an editor and critic was as driven as his work as a poet, and his friend Clive James suggested that even if Murray had written no poetry at all, he would still have been one of poetry's most important figures. This is To Fly in Just Your Suit by Les Murray. Humans are flown or fall. Humans can't fly. We're down with the gravity stemmers. Rare, thick-boned, often basso. Most animals above the tides are airborne. Typically tuned keen, they throw the ground away with wire feet and swoop rings round it. Magpies, listening askance for their food in and under lawn, strut so hair-trigger they almost dangle on earth out of the air. Nearly anything can make their tailcoats break into wings. A second short poem involves a bird. High-speed bird, at full tilt air gleamed, and a window-struck kingfisher snatched up lay on my palm, still beating faintly. Slowly, a tincture of whatever consciousness is infused its tremor, and ram beak wide as scissors, all hurt loganberry inside. It crept over my knuckle and took my outstretched finger in its wire foot rings. Cobalt wings, shutting on beige body, gold under eye whiskers, beak closing in recovery, it faced outward from me. For maybe 20 minutes, we sat together, one on one, as if staring back or forward into prehistory. Finally, this is Performance by Les Murray. I starred that night. I shone. I was footwork and firework in one. A rocket that wriggled up and shot darkness with a parasol of brilliance and a pee-wee descant on a flung bit. I was blusters of glitter bombs expanding to mantle and aurora from a crown. I was fouettes, falls of blazing paint, paraflares, spot welding cloudy heaven, loose gold off fierce toeholds of white. A finale red-tongued as a hacker leap. That too was a bud of all right. As usual, after any triumph, I was, of course, inconsolable.